The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning all, happy Wednesday. My name's Carl Holt here from Progress. Just going to wait another minute or so for folks to join and then we'll get underway. Okay, I can see some more have joined now, so we'll try and keep in keeping with time and whatever else we need to do. There's quite a few things to cover today, so hopefully what you see is of interest. My name's Carl Holt and I'm part of the Progress team here, and we're going to be covering Progress Flowmon in the public sector. So Flowmon, for those of you that didn't know, is a network monitoring tool that covers network performance and network detection and response. So there may be some new acronyms that I'll cover today. Feel free to ask some questions in the Q&A and the chat panel. Libby, one of my colleagues, is going to be moderating this. So just in terms of who I am, I'm part of the technical enablement team, so pre-sales background with a commercial brain. Been in this seat here at Progress 13 years as of tomorrow, so with an acquisition in between from the Kemp side of things. So Kemp Technologies was a solution that was acquired by Progress around about 4 and a bit years ago, and prior to that, and Kemp acquired Flowmon. So that's how these brands have come into the Progress portfolio. And just in terms of the Progress portfolio, just to give you a wider view here, and it's safe to say that there's a lot of technology in the portfolio at Progress. Originally, 40 odd years ago, we started with some relational databases, and that's what we've built the success on over the years. And over the last several years, there have been several acquisitions, both with Chef, with Kemp, and Flowmon, and even down to things like What's Up Gold. So there's a variety of things that sit in the what we call the infrastructure portfolio, and the infrastructure portfolio gives us this management and operations tool set for all things application delivery, load balancing, network performance monitoring, and cybersecurity insights, as well as things like automation. So you can see Chef there as well. So Chef is an automation tool set that would give you the capability to deliver solutions for compliance and a variety of other things. So just in terms of an introduction to Flowmon, I'm going to cover some of those bases where we are and where do we see ourselves fit into the heart of those networks, and what are the compelling stories in terms of the use cases. It's safe to say that not all networks are equal, and visibility is the key in all of this. So I'm going to walk you through an introduction to Flowmon. Where do we fit in the heart of the network, and ultimately what can we provide in terms of features and functions to give you, that all-seeing eye in the heart of the network. And again, looking at complementary technologies as well as to how do we integrate with those other systems that means that we are well placed for that visibility tool set. So just as a vision, Flowmon created a secure and transparent digital environment where people rule the network regardless of its complexity. And in all of this, there are several teams of people that we can help satisfy those needs for the business. So whether that's the network operations team or the security operations team, or even in between, network security operations, because we see some blending and lending of hands in those network and security teams. That means that we can give options in terms of what Flowmon provides to be able to keep that finger on the pulse. So the Flowmon platform is primarily designed for network and security engineers to remove these blind spots and simplify the network and those troubleshooting routines. So for those of you that are looking for solutions, whether that's managed or unmanaged, Flowmon gives you the ability to manage the network with this visibility tool set in its entirety. As I mentioned, the network operations side of the house is it covers a variety of different functions. And what are we actually solving for in terms of problems here? So when you look at the day-to-day operational side of things and in conjunction with what the network operations team are doing, they're looking for those application experiences where is there a problem, and is there a bottleneck here, is there a particular issue where the users feel some pain with that application. And it also gives you the ability to troubleshoot and forensically analyze, even down to packet level, what is happening in the heart of that application within the confines of the network, to be able to see where does the problem lie. And in some cases, where the problem doesn't lie. And when we get to these sort of shin-kicking exercises of where does the problem lie, you have several teams of people, including vendors, getting involved. And without visibility and without that finger on the pulse to say, here's where the problem is, it's very difficult for organizations to be able to troubleshoot these without this visibility tool set. So we can solve those sort of problems and give you those forensic tool sets as well, with things like Flowmon Packet Investigator, to get right into the heart of these typical sort of troubleshooting issues where some of these other tool sets do not have the capability. The other thing that you can look at as well in terms of the operations side is forecasting and planning. So this could be, do we have enough bandwidth? Do we have too much? Or in some cases, is the infrastructure that we have in our midst no longer fit for purpose? Do we need to make those upgrades? Do we need to sort of force the hand in terms of those capacities to make sure that the user experience is maintained? And then the other thing that we can bring into view here is the cloud and the SaaS type performance indicators here. So for customers that are leveraging in hybrid or cloud facing scenarios, we can leverage those insights to be able to give you, those predictive analytics in terms of the light up there. And on the right side of the house here, we also have the security operations side, and albeit a different ball game here in terms of what the customers are trying to find out within the confines of their network typically. And these would be threat detection methods. These would be looking at encrypted traffic, seeing what's going on under the hood, but without the need to decrypt it for obvious reasons. One, because of overhead, and two, because of integrity and maintenance of that integrity across the applications. We can also help detect those insider threats as well. So those insider threats are ultimately where folks have walked in with something on their shoes into the heart of the network, and ultimately those inside out attempts to get to those endpoints and with those bad actors in the room. It's safe to say that we have that finger on the pulse there. We also look at network behavioral analysis as well. So using machine learning, behavioral analytics, and some of the dynamic functions of Flowmon, we can predict what the network is doing and then create some alerts and monitors, so that if something does go awry, let's say, for example, my machine 3 p.m. Friday afternoon starts sending out some spurious traffic that's potentially okay traffic, and it could be email, it could be some form of web upload or some high transfer, but ultimately that could constitute some form of potential breach. And there's a variety of different things that I'll show you in today's session as to how do we get to the essence of detail in order to troubleshoot whether this is good or bad behavior, and be able to then alert those administrators to either remove or restrict access to the network, and ultimately be able to solve for those problems. In the heart of that slide, you can see what all this is bringing about in conjunction with those two teams. So for those that are involved in infrastructure design and deployment, and anybody that's using their background knowledge is in forensics and the incident monitoring, and this single tool set here gives you a lot of classification of those types of traffic, but also recommendations into how to investigate and solve these problems. And for any of you that have to go down that incident response routes for governance and compliance or policy verification and enforcement, and it's safe to say it's difficult without that visibility in order to drive the compliance. So Flowmon is ingrained into some of those compliance frameworks for things like NIST 2 and DORA, which we'll touch on a little bit more further on in the presentation. So where do we sit in the heart of the network? And when you look at these sort of security tool sets and the devices that may constitute some form of security function, let's say, for example, you have perimeter security covered with firewalls and VPN devices and all these sort of other inspection tools that are seeing who's coming in and out of the network. And that's one aspect of security. Couple that with things like endpoint security, where you have antivirus or personal firewalls or even anti-malware. And whether we classify this as antivirus solutions or endpoint protection, that endpoint protection can only go by what it sees in terms of what is the user doing, what is the application, what is that device doing. And safe to say that you can't get full coverage across the network, across all of those devices, whether that be a server, a router, a switch, and any network devices or any desktop or laptop devices. You can't install these sort of endpoint agents on every device in order to get that visibility. So as we sit in the heart of the network here, and we're not using agents, we're using flow-based technology coming from said routers, firewall switches within the confines of the network to be able to look at what are they processing in terms of traffic and communications. And we can build that picture. So out of path, out of line from any user aspects here. And what it does do is it scales massively for those organizations that need to get that visibility and gain those insights across the board. So we are a network-centric tool set that is looking at the application and network traffic that will give you the opportunity to make those better decisions in conjunction with the compliance and policies and processes that we need to follow these days. So just in terms of recognition as well, and it's not just me saying how good the technology is. We have third-party organizations like Gartner, EMA, Forrester, and Quadrants. You can download these reports for yourselves. You can gain access to what those insights mean in terms of network detection and response, and NPMD, which is network performance monitoring and diagnostics. And those two satisfactions here across those several reports and those brands that recognize us as a technology, it's safe to say that these sort of things speak volume. So I would urge you to jump onto our website, and we'll share some links with you and post the webinar to give you access to be able to go and gain access to these types of reports for potentially your peers, for example. So, and there's a lot of additional value in looking at these because they are non-biased or unbiased third-party reports to note. Okay, so Flowmon in general, we're going to cover now some of the components of Flowmon cybersecurity and what is the genetic makeup of the solution here. And I think it's important just to give you a bird's eye view of how do we deploy this, what are the components, and what do I need in order to get a solution into the heart of the network. And in conjunction with the modules that I've mentioned, or the buzzwords that I've mentioned here, the NPMD piece and the NDR piece and APM, these are all separate modules within the technology, and NPMD comes included with probe and collector, which I'll cover in a second. NDR or ADS, which is in the analytics in terms of the anomaly detection, that is that is a separate module, obviously commercially chargeable, and same for APM or application performance monitoring. So if we're looking at these two or three aspects of what most customers would want in a tool set, and safe to say that you can deploy NPMD very quickly, very easily with just the use of a probe or a couple of probes and a collector in the heart of a network, and couple that with an NDR module, which is our ADS system or anomaly detection system. That's where the real magic happens in terms of the light up around the security piece. And if you have applications that aren't performant, we can look at those optimizations within that workflow and to be able to look at what those potential performance issues are and addressing those suboptimal application experience issues. So we're not just a single entity here in terms of what those problems are that we solve, and dependent upon what problem we're trying to resolve in terms of whether that's a performance issue, whether that's a security issue, or whether that's just a a vantage point in the network that's giving us the ability to look at those insights to say, and everything's good. And the green light here is the holy grail. What we want to make sure is that there's no compromises on the network, and in the advent of anything and being shipped into the network, whether that's bad actors gaining access through vulnerabilities and applications, or even something being walked into the corporate network, and we can use those NDR tool sets here to be able to determine what that behavior is reticent towards. So just in terms of network here, and what is it that we have in terms of features and functions? And the routers and all of these devices that are abound in organizations today have the capability to turn those packet level details into flow-based technologies. So anything that will support NetFlow, IPFix, SFlow, JFlow, and tool sets we can pull into Flowmon. And that is where the magic then happens. So through the probe, and the probe can enrich those standard details that we get from the network to provide additional telemetry information. And we can then look at those dashboards in terms of performance for things like server response times, round trip times, congestion, and usual sort of performance metrics, and couple that then with the anomaly detection system that you see in the modules on the lower half of that slide. And through the monitoring center, then we can give you all of this visibility. And how do we do this? We deliver this based on hardware and software. So we have a hardware platform that is traditionally a Dell series platform that delivers our virtual appliance embedded into the hardware solution. Alternatively, if you have a preferred hypervisor as well, so whether that be VMware, Hyper-V, or KVM, and can install a virtual appliance or multiple virtual appliances for things like probes. And probes and collectors, all things equal here, and whether that's a hardware or software solution that you're looking for, or combined view, it may be better to have hardware probes in some of those environments where performance is or ultra performance is absolutely required. And in some cases, you may want a hardware collector in those confines to be able to dedicate that scale to the hardware as well. So a variety of different methods that we can deploy our platforms on. Interesting to say as well, we can also deploy the probes and the collectors into cloud-facing scenarios as well. So if you're looking for visibility in AWS or Azure or GCP, and you can deploy probes in there and take those native cloud logs into consideration here for visibility. So we cover all of those bases. And so I've mentioned probes, I've mentioned collectors. Probes are effectively a sensor on the network and receiving the detail from those devices that are in the midst. Probe then feeds the collector, and the collector then presents the detail in terms of dashboards and widgets and everything else that you would expect to see in a NOC and a SOC to be able to determine what is my network doing at what particular point in time. So I mentioned a probe, and so that probe is a network device capturing traffic from various points in the network. And I will always state here, the bigger the picture, the better the story. It's no point, and there's no point in looking in one corner of the network and expecting us to see what's going on in other areas of the network if we don't have that visibility and capability to see into what's going on. So a classic example here, let's say, for example, a customer has multiple internal networks and an aggregation point within the confines of that switch to be able to get to that essence of detail. If they have a DMZ, for example, or they have a cloud-facing scenario where they have other applications that live and breathe in those areas of the network, and without a probe in those segments, it would be difficult for us to see the whole story here. So I'll always state, again, the bigger the picture, the better the story. Multiple probes is usually a requirement inside most enterprises, larger organizations, because of the logical separation between those networks and components of those networks for needing for analysis. So the probe will generate flow data from the network traffic copies. So yes, you will need port mirrors or some form of span or tap ports on those network segments to feed that detail into the probe. And that data that's been collected by the probe will include information about network flows. The good thing here is, when we're looking at flows rather than packets, sampling those flows and streamlining and slickening up the actual processing of this is key here. And if we're looking at packet level detail, safe to say that those tool sets that look at packet level information, and they need a lot of storage, they need a lot of and potential capacity to retain that information, whereas flow-based technology, which is what Flowmon is built upon, and gives us those insights without the needs for long-term storage and massive amounts of storage. What I would ask yourselves today is, how much detail would I want to see over what period of time, and how much do I need to retain this information, in terms of time for review? What I would say here is, the fact that Flowmon has a finger on the pulse with those samples, and the sample detail can range from sort of 30 seconds to 5 minutes in those windows. And as quickly as we receive that information, those alerts and those alerts and points of view from what we see within the network, and it's safe to say that those admins that are going to get those alerts are going to get them quickly in conjunction with whatever those activities, good or bad, on the network are abound with this tool set. So again, just on the collector side of things, again, physically or virtually available, and we are, and this is the aggregation point for all flow sources to be able to then be rendered into those dashboards and sources of truth to give you the biggest picture possible around the network. So, and the collector can receive telemetry from the probes both physically and virtually. Interestingly enough as well, for those of you that know about the Kemp Loadmaster solution, and Kemp Loadmaster has the Flowmon probe built into it as standard. So, and if you have already availed of and the Loadmaster solution over the last several years, you could upgrade the firmware on that and avail of a built-in probe to start that telemetry conversation with us if needed. So essentially, that sourcing the data comes from the devices around the network into the probe, and then ultimately into the collector. And the collector is also available to be able to receive other flow-based sources. So we don't necessarily need probes in every segment, and we do get some customers that consume just a collector because they have the ability to use those other flow sources and don't want to leverage the additional telemetry that probe offers. But it's safe to say that you will get a better quality picture in combination with probes and collectors. And for those of you that just want to sort of see that source of truth without having too many sensors on the network, and we can do that, but ultimately I would encourage you to see the value of absolutely utilizing the probe to enrich that detail that's coming from those other devices. I mentioned ADS as well. So for those of you that are familiar with the cybersecurity aspects of these type of forensic tools, ADS is an anomaly detection system. So what are we actually doing? We're detecting anomalies as they occur and almost in real time on the network, and we're telling the admins of the security teams here that there's a problem abound. What actually happens after that event is down to what are the desired outcomes. And the system that we have at Flowmon has a fully enriched API under the hood here. And so those analytics and the machine learning and all of this sort of ability to detect that unusual and suspicious behavior, that's one aspect of Flowmon, but then being able to integrate with other toolings that allow us to make those decisions or help make those decisions that, let's say 3 o'clock in the morning, something goes awry, a system is in a position of compromise. The last thing I want to do is to tell the admin team that, hey, here's the problem, but not be able to look at how do we fix this. So in conjunction with our API, and some of our customers leverage those APIs to kick off firewall rules, for example, or some form of blocking rule against an application. And a desired outcome there might be to lock Carl's machine out because it's deemed as doing something erroneous, but ultimately there's still needing to be some form of break fix scenario here. We've got to go back onto my machine, see what's causing the issue, but ultimately it's prevented me from gaining any further access to whatever that application or storage facility was, or wherever that data resides. So ultimately, and these systems allow us some grace in making sure that whatever we see, those actionable insights are one thing, and then the security team are going to get that detail, and two, the ability to then kick off a set of subsequent rules or subsequent actions is in the heart of all of this through the API. So just in terms of a roundup here for things like network performance, what does this give us in terms of benefits and features? And it's a single source of visibility across all environments, whether that's on premises, in a hybrid environment, or even cloud facing. And you'll find it difficult to find a single tool set that covers these at a commercial validation point that's easy to swallow, shall we say. And ultimately, we can see those performance degradations immediately because of how we gain action, gain insight into these networks within sub 1 hour of deployment of probes and collector. For example, you could start seeing those insights and those degradations within that 1 hour deployment, and so that if there are any issues straight away on the performance side of things, and you're going to get that light up in terms of where do those potential issues lie. And you also have the ability to monitor the availability, usage, and the capacity of whatever that application, service is, etc. And even down to monitoring those things like Office 365, for example. We can give you those insights through the dashboards, and even when the application doesn't necessarily reside within the confines of that network. So an ability to reveal those bottlenecks, and analyze the errors and automate the detection, as well as tell the folks that are looking at these systems, as well as beyond. We can feed these into these events into other systems of choice as well. So if you need an integration into a SIEM solution, as an example, and I'll show you an example of that a little later on. So just some of the challenges, I'm thinking out loud here. I'm sure that for the folks that are on the call today, there must be at least 2 or 3 of these and hexagonal challenges that you guys face on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And visibility is the key. Without that visibility, if you can't see it, you can't gain any insights into being able to resolve these. So the first and foremost thing here is Flowmon gives you that visibility tool set, as well as being able to eliminate those security blind spots. So as an organization, I'd urge you to look at the tool sets that you do have, and is there a particular issue that we can look to try and resolve? My team are on hand here to be able to qualify whether Flowmon is a good fit for you, and ultimately move forward with things like proof of value, proof of concept, in order to eliminate these challenges. The other things that you see in this slide here, and protracted issue resolution. I mentioned whose shins do we go and kick when these applications fail. I find in my years in pre-sales, we get involved in conversations around things aren't performant, these things are not working as they should be, and when you start looking at these types of issues, and when you don't have a tool set that ties back to those events and the correlation to those events, it's difficult to troubleshoot them retrospectively without that detail in flight. So all of these things that sit in the heart of Flowmon give you that capacity. The major one here is the compliance and the challenges that these experiences allow us. So whether compliance is a big thing for most of these folks that are looking for these types of tool sets, I would say that tying these things to SLAs, to compliance frameworks such as MITRE ATT&CK and whatever else that's out there, and without that source of truth, it's very difficult to maintain and ultimately state facts that we've met our SLAs, we've maintained compliance, and we're in that governance state. So Flowmon really helps with that in a variety of areas. So just in terms of NDR, again, the features and benefits here, just as key takeaways, the automatic detection of threats hidden within the network. When you look at the chain of events that would constitute a let's say a ransomware attack or some form of arbitrary behavior that's going to put data or the network at risk, what do we see? We see everything from end to end. So even if this starts as a port scan, and turns into some form of credential stuffing and that arbitrary and nasty behavior that supersedes the encryption and the exfiltration process. And we have a finger on that pulse all the way through the attack chain, and you'll see that in a little clearer in a few more slides. But ultimately, without that the automated detection, how are you keeping a finger on the pulse, and how are you sleeping at night in conjunction with the tool sets that you have? The last thing I'd want you to do is to go into an organization following a good night's sleep to see that the place is on fire and it's a raging inferno. So Flowmon can help let you sleep at night, knowing that we've got that all-seeing eye in the heart of the network. And the other things in terms of machine learning and behavioral insights, and there's a lot of dynamic detail under the hood here. We're not just looking for signatures or known entities. We're looking at behavior and analyzing that behavior to see what is happening there. So in terms of AI and the intelligence inside Flowmon really lends hand towards these sort of new behaviors that we've become accustomed to over the last sort of 12, 18 months in terms of AI and these things that feed into these type of solutions. What I will also state here is the fact of reality. The fact of reality is if you have a breach or a potential for a breach, and God forbid you've been in a position of compromise in the past, and if you got some tooling like Flowmon and the visibility that it provides would have given you that layer of protection to be able to take those proactive insights and turn it into those actionable insights to make sure that the breach either didn't get as far as it potentially did have, but ultimately going forward, and if there are any other potential breach points on the network, whether that's application vulnerabilities and whatever else, and safe to say that we're keeping those opportunities to restrict those movements of those bad actors in the room, to make sure that we don't end up in that position of compromise. The interesting fact about a compromise is it's not just an immediate effect. The first 7 to 30 days is the discovery and the gaining a vantage point within the network. The next 6 months that you see in this, the average days of around 277, so around 9 months is the average for most breaches to be either identified and not necessarily contained, but identified and then start taking action at that particular point. So what I would say to you here is ask yourselves, if I did have a breach, one, how would I know about it? And two, how long has that bad actor been in the room? And given those statistics, safe to say that you've got to go and forensically unpick all of this. And if you don't have a tool set like Flowmon, it's very difficult to be able to see where that where those connections have been made, where the user or where that bad actor has been in within the confines of the network. And ultimately, you've got to then plan for the worst and hope for the best at that particular point in time. And then couple that with fines, sanctions, and just the damage that a breach would cause. I'm sure there's an ROI in there that we can take advantage of in terms of a breach coupled with, let's say, for example, the damage and the brand reputation that occurs. And safe to say that would be a fraction of the cost in terms of what's on the table there. So again, just a familiarity thing here. If you're involved in internal security, looking for these insights into viruses, malware, botnets, crypto mining, etc., Flowmon checks that box. We can also look for those anomalies in behavior and changes in long-term behavior as well, because of what we can recognize over a period of time. We can also detect those attacks even in the earliest forms. So again, an example here would be a port scan or some form of ARP scan. That might constitute sort of normal behavior on most networks because you've got admins looking for that sort of detail. But ultimately, how do you counteract this? And in terms of anomalies as well, there's ability to look at applications or protocols that are in use that are misbehaving. And I'll give you an example here. ICMP with no payload would be normal. And ICMP with a payload could constitute exfiltration. Therefore, I want to be able to identify and alert those admins that are looking at this. There's also operational problems, so excessive loads and unresponsive services or even broken updates. And it's consuming bandwidth, it's and having a detriment on the user experience, and all of these things come into play, as well as building a picture of those wanted or unwanted applications on the network all live in the heart of Flowmon. So I mentioned compliance, and I'm not going to touch on this too deeply, but with the technologies and the capabilities of Flowmon, we have 200 plus algorithms, we've got 40 plus different detection methods that are looking for anomalies, we're looking for high transfer rates, we're looking for communications of interest where it fits outside of the demographic of the business. And all of this is able to be kept long term for archiving and collection, as well as the interpretation. So if you need to be able to prove compliance over a period of time, then you can archive this detail off and leverage all of these different detection methods, and that will cover the bases in terms of compliance. And again, for those that are sitting in those teams of folks that are looking after this, if you're in a SOC team or a cybersecurity incident response team looking at threat detection, hunting, and whatever else we need here, it's safe to say that the ADS module gives us that coverability. And if we're in the NetOps or the NetSecOps side of the house and we're looking at those planned and predictable and performance-related issues, where we're needing to monitor those applications and look at root cause analysis, we bring all of this into view. How do we do this? There's a load of articles that correspond to our OES, OIS side of things, so it's operators of essential and information services. And there's a lot of different articles that constitute an ability to comply here. So again, no one size fits all in all of this, but Flowmon is certainly covering a lot of those bases in terms of the articles that we correspond to. And again, for the cybersecurity incident response teams as well, for those that are looking for real-time monitoring, as well as the ability to collect, analyze, and forensically unpick what happened. And without this tool set, there's a big cross in the box or a gape in the network there. As I mentioned, the integrations with SIEMs and analytic platforms as well, and safe to say that there's no one set of eyeballs on all systems within the confines of the network. So here we have an ability to leverage whatever detail and insights we provide into Flowmon, and so from those sources of truth. But if you need to feed these details and alerts into other systems of choice, we can export that detail either from syslog, SNMP, and REST API to be able to utilize that detail. So if there's other systems that those other eyeballs are looking upon, and we can give you those insights, that means that those other folks that are sat in front of those other dashboards, those other monitoring tools, have at least some insights from what we've seen around the network to make better decisions. So, and they're a very powerful tool set, because if it is some erroneous behavior that then needs to kick off a chain of events, i.e. a help desk ticket or some form of service response. And these are all of the types of things that Flowmon can enable through what we see around the network. Okay, so that was a little bit about Flowmon, just in a high-level view, and I'm going to cover a couple of use cases in terms of successes now. So in public sector, we've got customers that are either retrospectively fitting Flowmon in because they've been compromised, or they've got suspicions of areas of compromise, indicators of compromise on the network. And in this particular scenario, it was a server and a DMZ running a proprietary application, and that proprietary application, from a publishing perspective, was exposed to the outside world. And so first and foremost, if you're publishing those applications to the outside world, safe to say that you still need to patch, still need to manage them, but not all of those vulnerabilities that may be associated to these applications are, known today. So there's two or three things for me here. There's things like zero trust, there's things like 0 day, there's also an ability to just protect an application from those unwanted and outside threats, even things like directory harvest attacks or some form of credential stuffing here. So what actually happened is, as the attacker tried to gain access to the network, and the pivot was use the application to break into the environment, and ultimately then laterally compromise the environment. So that lateral movement meant that the application that was at fault, and we now have a footprint in the network to be able to identify what was happening at each particular step of the breach, but ultimately, and in terms of time to value here, as we've seen and in the previous slides, the ability to detect whatever that bad behavior is constitutional of, and a port scan or some form of arbitrary behavior here, like and some form of credential access, and where they're using keyloggers, they are also using brute force attacks and these and other automated tools to gain access to those applications. We would have seen that well in advance of any form of compromise. So, and in terms of time to value here, and within an hour, safe to say that we were able to detect what the bad act was. And it started with an ARP scan. It then turned into an ICMP scan, looking at those devices to try and gain that vantage point on the network. And then it was ultimately a secure shell, because they're able to identify the operating system. And so without something like Flowmon in place, until the damage has occurred, until there's a raging inferno here, and these tools that the customer had in principle prior to us and being on the network, they couldn't do any detection. So ROI wise, within that hour, we've detected several stages of the attack, given them those insights, and they've been able to mitigate that attack and ultimately prevent that breach as a direct result of our inclusion. The second success story here is a university over in the Czech Republic, based over in Brno, which is where Flowmon was ultimately founded back in the day. And the infrastructure team, as well as the security team, and they're looking after students and workforces within the confines of the Masaryk University, and multi-thousands of users, and thousands of devices, and across 20 odd different sites within the campus of that environment. And they couldn't find a tool set, whether they developed something themselves or whether they tried to find an off-the-shelf solution here to be able to provide that monitoring as well as the incident handling here. So we looked at this in several areas of interest. One was the visibility piece, and two was just the expanse and sprawl of what they had around the network. And this gave us the opportunity to deploy multiple probes around the network. And so, as I mentioned in previous slides here, and the bigger the picture, the better the story. It's no point in just putting something in the heart of 2 or 3 data centers here when there's multiple segments of those campuses that we needed to provide visibility and monitoring on. So they determined where were those critical points in the university network to be able to put our probes and enrich that detail in. So around 25 probes were deployed, mixture of hardware and software. And those probes then feed a single collector at the head end of the network, and so it's a high availability piece here. So we've got 2 collectors, and one feeding the other here, and having some form of redundancy in the midst of all of this, because security and visibility is key to the success of the university, and we wouldn't want to put that single collector in all of this. So 25 probes feed the collectors. Collectors are replicated between them, providing detailed insights into exactly what's going on. And ultimately, the result was the fact that they gained outstanding network visibility and reporting. They have the ability to automatically detect those security issues and policy violations, the policies being erroneous applications. We don't want applications where potential compromises could come into play, and BitTorrents and the crypto mining software that tends to manifest through HTTPS. These are the things that we've been able to eradicate through the lens within Flowmon. And the automation of the cybersecurity incident response is our API kicking off a chain of events that says, hey, admin team, here's what we've seen. They then go off and do and deliver the process of investigating and then eradicating whatever it is from the network. And the utilization of Flowmon in the research project as well, and they're helping to leverage a two-way conversation here. So we always like to work with our communities here at Progress to make sure that our teams have a finger on the pulse in terms of what's next for you guys. So we would ultimately urge you to connect with us and use that vantage point in terms of what's changing in your environments to be able to determine what we need to do next. So just a quick statement there from Jan Vikapal. And although we love to create new security monitoring tools, we also need a reliable cornerstone of the monitoring infrastructure. So they have the capability to build their own tool sets, but it's safe to say that from an investment point of view, Flowmon gave them exactly what they need for performance and the incident response. And because they've got an in-region, almost on the doorstep support team as well, and we're a multilingual support team and a business that covers 24/7 operations across the board, across the globe. So we satisfied a lot of things there. Finally, I just want to touch on a different slant on a success story. When you think about ransomware and how it's manifest in the network, there's lots of different stages of those attacks that you saw earlier in conjunction with the average of 9 months of the bad actor being in the room. In this chain of events, there's stages of the attack. There's also timelines of those attacks. And ultimately, without that visibility in the heart of all of this, then it's difficult for you as admins, as CISOs, and folks that are responsible for driving the business forward and making sure that the security and integrity is maintained. And it's difficult to do this without this tool set. And the other thing that I would say here is, and a lot of other folks that I've been working with in the past have tool sets that sit in the heart of, let's say, the data layer. So for example, in a storage environment, and they may have an overlaid security tool set that's sitting looking at what the storage is doing and who's accessing the storage, and it's then looking at files being encrypted, whether that's 1, 10, 500, 5,000 files, and ultimately making decisions based on behavior at that point. What I would say here is if you have a tool set that's looking at data security, then you also need the network security piece here to complement exactly what's happening there. So if you're providing things like backup, and those backups might run daily, weekly, hourly, whatever that schedule is. If something comes into the network that could potentially compromise that data layer, and whether that's and some form of archive, whether that's some form of backup or storage in general, and we can be that eye in the sky that's making sure that from a ransomware protection, whatever is trying to gain access to that data is not getting further down the attack chain to then put that position of compromise on the solution. So everything that you see here is complementary to data security. So for things like Veeam backups, for ECS, for in the Dell realm, for example, or any storage platform for that matter, whether that's Scality or Cloudian or Dell EMC or ECS or PowerScale, we've got a lot of integrations into those tool sets as well and systems that give us that visibility. So just in terms of the takeaway here for ransomware detection and response, again, a real customer case here. And we can replicate this and show you this in a lab environment, running things like port scans and the initial stages of a ransomware attack. And all of that activity has been recorded then and through the realms of Flowmon. And ultimately, and what it does do is it shows where those compromised devices are and what are the applications that are in position and potential for compromise. So fact of reality here is that port scan turned into an SMB connection share, and that connection was ultimately in a vulnerable state, and they could use things like Bluekeep to then jump onto the RDP server and leverage those vulnerabilities that are available to them to be able to laterally move around the network. What it did give them then is the ability to use that vantage point to exfiltrate sensitive customer data. And all of this would have been seen with Flowmon and with that port mirror because of the behavior and because of what we're seeing on the environment. And we can ultimately prevent those encryption scenarios where the data is now compromised, and we've seen all too often this week, and I see it daily, weekly with the alerts and the bulletins that I get for large organizations, and I don't want to put the microscope on any organization here, but they're large corporates with big budgets for things like security, and it's safe to say that nobody is immune. It's not a case of if you get hit, it's when you get hit and how many times. So last few things from me today, and just in terms of the visuals here, I'm just going to show you quickly a dashboard of results here. And in conjunction with what Flowmon provides, we can give you this dashboard of results based on events by priority. So those priorities could be critical, high, medium, low alerts. As we detect those critical alerts, they are triggering events that mean that there's actions and reactions that take place. But it gives us, through the dashboard here, the ability to drill into that full event detail to be able to determine what is abound in the attack. And those flows and those attached or associated flows show us what was in play in terms of event evidence and the attributes relating to that IDS event. And the guided demo is available online. We can also do a full demonstration with the pre-sales team, or even a POC stroke POV. And in terms of simplicity here, the detail you can get to very, very quickly. And because of the classification and categorization of each incident, and it's safe to say that you can determine at what particular point in the attack were we, what was the area of compromise, and what that event type constitutes. So, and a lot of information in just a single entity of the dashboard here. But what I would do is, if you are interested to see this in its entirety, is to book a short demonstration with the team to satisfy those burning appetites. Okay, so just in terms of a wrap up then, and we're almost on time. What I wanted to make sure is you guys can get a deeper view of this, and if you do need to look at a deeper demonstration, we can absolutely do that. There is a sizing exercise as well, so we can send some detail over that will quiz you as to what your organization looks like, what are the problems that we're looking to solve, and give you the best opportunity to focus on resolving those challenges. So if it is that you want to take a proof of concept here, or some form of trial, we can do that, and that's usually for a 30-day period, and we'll, again, pre-sales will assist with sizing and whatever else. And just in terms of resources, you can avail of the trial from our website. You can just request this just with a handful of details from yourselves to gain access to the trial licensing and the downloads segment. We've also got data sheets and case studies that may fit your particular vertical, your particular market that you work within. So, and we will share the slides with you post the webinar today, and those links will be made available to you within the presentation. We also have our own trust center as well. So Progress is almost $1 billion organization with a global footprint here, and we follow those standards globally. So if you need to know a little bit more about our approach in terms of our security and our associations with those, and you can go onto our trust center and see that we are fit for purpose in terms of what we're doing to maintain our compliance as an organization as well. So that was it for today, and I hope it's been of use, and we will circle back for a few questions. I did see a few things pop up in the chat on the way. So Libby, is there anything of note in the chat?
Hi, Carl, that was brilliant, thank you. And yeah, we do have a few questions. So question 1, how can Flowmon help us identify network issues before they affect our users?
Okay, so hopefully you saw on the dashboard where we're identifying that flow-based detail, and those flows are recognized against patterns and behaviors and all sorts of things. So if it's application specific, we've got the ability to carve out what those applications look like. If we then look at it based on protocol specific detail, and a port scan as an example that I've used throughout, and if that port scan is not from an expected user, i.e. one of the IT admins that's looking to see whether there's some ports open, or if it's an IP scan to see if there's any free IP addresses, if that's not their machine coming from that particular segment, then one would expect to raise a red flag and say, this is erroneous bad behavior. So that would be reticent across any port, any protocol, any application that doesn't necessarily fit the fit whatever the whatever the fingerprint is of the legitimate users. So anything that is classified as legitimate behavior would carry on at will. Anything that's classified as illegitimate, and we're raising that red flag immediately. And so even though it's very, very early in its form, we're in a safe place. Any further ones, Libby?
Yeah, does Flowmon require a lot of manual monitoring?
Initially, it's safe to say that you do need to tweak things to, not all networks are equal, right? So I would say here your needs compared to mine would be different, and same for all of those organizations that are on the call today. So there's an initial tweaking, fine tuning of these things. There are also false positive analysis tools within the heart of Flowmon that you can leverage as well. But once you've got that tweaked and fine tuned and things working within the first sort of day to 30 days, safe to say that you won't need to keep too much of an eye on this. We're keeping the eye on the network and telling you what's going on for you to then use those insights. So if you do come across any false positives, you bring into view a new application or a new segment on the network. If it starts generating false positives, you can mitigate those very, very quickly through the tool set.
Brilliant. Is Flowmon suitable for organizations without a large SecOps team?
Yes, that's exactly our sweet spot in terms of enterprises. You don't need to be a security expert to leverage the capability of Flowmon, and our customers range from a handful of tens, hundreds of users, all the way up to several tens of thousands into the hundreds of thousands of users. And the reason for that is because as a tool set as the all-seeing eye within the network, the satisfaction of NPMD, for example, might not fit the security team here. We're looking at network performance, and we want to leverage Flowmon for NPMD, which I've explained that is standalone. It's dedicated with probe and collector, or you can leverage the ADS module, which then gives you the NDR functionality, which is the network detection response. So no stone unturned, no vertical unturned, no size unturned. Several hundred users to multi-thousands of users. It doesn't make any difference. Again, I'll make my statement. The bigger the picture, the better the story. Visibility is the key.
Yeah. And then finally, how long does it take to start seeing insights once Flowmon is deployed?
It could be a few minutes, it could be a few hours. It all depends on what is the network doing. If it's deployed in conjunction with the probe and the collector at 3 a.m. and there's nothing on the network and everything's shut down, then it's going to take till 9 a.m. onwards, I would guess. But unless there's any bad behaviors going on or whatever else. But the insights are typically within the hour in terms of things like performance. If it's security and if there's no compromises on there, and we've got a great health check in terms of green light services here, and what we are doing is preparing you or setting some preparedness for any potential compromise introspectively rather than retrospectively. So if we're being deployed to investigate something because there's indicators of compromise there, and as you saw on the case study, within the hour we're able to identify and eradicate that issue, as opposed to wait for something to happen. That wait for something to happen is only going to be a matter of time. So it's not, and if you're in a good state today and you deploy Flowmon today and we can confirm that, that's a great position to be in. I'd hate to think that we're finding holes in the network, but that's ultimately what we can be used for as well.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Okay, so is there any further questions in the chat at all today? If not, then we can sign off for a sunny Wednesday, and hopefully it has been of interest. What we will do is to follow up with each of the delegates that have joined today, just to see what the areas of interest are and get some feedback from you. And thanks for joining and taking the time. I hope it's been of benefit to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Carl.
Okay, thanks, Libby. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks.